Good morning. We are middle of the review, second review of Hemshech Ayin Beis. And we're on page 1352. We've already learned these pages all the way till the end, but now we're learning it with the perspective of the Alter Rebbe, Mittler Rebbe's Maimer Mika Hashem Elokeinu, as well as understanding the flow that most likely would have continued had the Rebbe Rashab finished writing and continued writing the Hemshech Ayin Beis. So yesterday, we went over more detail the difference between Mamayla Lamato and Mamata Lamayla. Quoting, we cited the Maimer of the Shavuos Maimer Tov Fresh Ayin Hey in Hemshech Ayin Beis Volume 2. And we learned inside the piece about the difference between when you come from the bottom up, Yadaita Hayom, or from the top down, Ata Haresa Ladas. And it was the focus was on the word Haresa, that you appeared with the Riyah, that we actually saw the experience. So essentially, which we're going to learn now is we're in the middle of we're beginning the review, what is the power of eyesight, of vision, and specifically vision. But the context was that you can achieve a vision by being shown something from above, like by Matan Torah, Ata Resel Adas, God appeared, or you can achieve a vision through your work from the bottom up. So even though initially, when we work from the bottom up, we'll learn that's more Shmiyah, not Riyah, but the ultimate goal is joining them both together. As we had by Matan Torah, we saw the sounds and we heard the sights. So though general Riyah is a Mamayla Lamata thing and Shmiyah is Mamata Lamayla, but the goal ultimately, as we discussed, is that the power of our eye that right now needs an outside light to illuminate the darkness, and then the eye can see, that ultimately the eye will become so trained to see godliness that we'll be able to see it directly without the need for an outside external siyua, support or help. So it's like seeing in the dark. We'll see godliness, even though right now godliness is concealed in the tzimtzum, and our work from the bottom up is to slowly acclimate ourselves and learn how to experience godliness and transcendence. We also have the strength coming from a Maila Lamata from Torah, that ultimately we should be so refined and through and through that we can experience it in the highest possible levels, especially considering that the neshama is rooted higher than Torah, and the neshama ultimately, like the etzem koyach hariyah that we'll talk about soon, the power of vision in the soul has no limitations. It's only a limitation when the neshama comes inside the body, when the power of vision comes inside of a physical eye. Because there's a dissonance, and there's a certain limitation, like we see in this world, the divine that manifests within existence. So existence is like a cloak that conceals. But la'asilave, that cloak will be removed because we will have refined ourselves to the extent that we can then be a seamless vehicle for Elokus in this world. So that is a little what we summed up yesterday, and then we discussed at length difference between arriving to experiencing the divine through human intelligence, through science, through human understanding of the mystical, and in contrast to being revealed from above, the Chassidus and the other mystical the schools of thought. So that's what we discussed yesterday. So now let's go back, page 1352, where the Rebbe Rashab begins. So now we're getting into a discussion of a vision, the vision and Eyesight. So the Rebbe Rashab says, and I'll read a few lines. As I said, I'm going to read select sections as we do this review. And again, the goal here is to understand Ohr Hariyah, which will help us understand what is Torah Ohr, light, and also understanding the lower level of light, Ner Mitzvah or Ner Hashem Rishma Sodom, ultimately reaching to Torah Ohr as we learned in the previous paragraph, that the mitzvahs lead us. They're the psila, the wick that contain that the flame, the Torah Ohr, is held on by the mitzvahs. But ultimately, we'll have the full experience of Torah Ohr with the etzem. So we'll have both the etzem completely revealed without any dilution at all, without any compromise of its integrity, as we learned at length in the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer. So that's where we're headed. But to get there, there's going to be quite a few pages, as I said, over 170 pages to be exact, till the end of the Hemshech, but it's going to be 110 pages, this Ohr Hariyah. So let's begin by, if you want to follow with the text, I'm on page 1352, and we learn as follows. The Ima Yese B'chinas Ohr, when we say eyesight, Ohr Hariyah, the light of the eye. So we call it light because the eye sees. It's an illuminating experience. If a person's eyes are closed, or God forbid someone is blind, there is no Ohr. It's a dark state. So even though it's called Ohr, but here's the interesting paradox. And then to the extent, v'yesh deya, and there's even an opinion, so there are different opinions on this matter. But one of them is that the manner of seeing is that the eye actually transmits sparks of light. So think of it like you don't see any light coming out of the eye, obviously, but there's an opinion that the eye actually transmits netzutzer hayetzim and ayin, u'k'moshon is ill. So even according to that opinion, there are other opinions. There's an opinion that's like think of a camera, that the eye is seeing the reflection of light on the object that the eye sees. But nevertheless, why does the eye see it, not the ears or the nose or the mouth? Because the eye has a particular lens ability to see things. So there's different thoughts and opinions on it. So even though there's an opinion even that the eye actually has a form of light, Mekom Mokim, Eina Ohr Atzmi. It's not an Ohr Atzmi. Remember before we said Torah Ohr is an Ohr Atzmi. What's an Ohr Atzmi? Means that it gives off light. Ohr HaShemesh, the sun itself, is a luminary. The sun transmits light. The eye does not. And the best proof, as we're going to discuss, is because the eye cannot see in the dark. If the eye was like the sun or like a flame or a candle, then you don't need any outside light. The eye would be like beams of light that just shined and see. So on one hand, we call it Ohr Hariyah. On the other hand, it's not like the Ohr Atzmi. V'gam loy, and it's also not like another form of light we know is from Even Tev, Hafokis Even Tev, a luminous stone. The shining of a luminous stone. We know there are stones, minerals, that give off light. They're luminous. They light up in the dark. They glow, basically. Even Tev HaBohir. The light of the sun actually radiates and illuminates the darkness. So he's now contrasting the light of the eye with the light of Ohr Atzmi of the sun. And when the sun illuminates, it's not just due to the fact that the sun is a shining body, a shining entity. In other words, you could see there are things, for example, in the dark, you walk into a dark room and that something is glowing, let's say, like I said, a stone. That stone is not necessarily illuminating the room. You just see a glow. So he's saying, so when we say the sun is not like that. In other words, that's due to the fact that something is glowing, is that it will be seen also in the darkness. So most objects in a dark space will be completely invisible. We won't be able to see. But there's certain things that have a glowing ingredients or glowing element to it. And therefore, the darkness does not darken or conceal, being that thing is a glowing entity. And as a result of that, in its own place, it's radiating. In other words, if you go very close to it, you'll see a green glow or a blue glow or whatever it may be. But you cannot say it illuminated the room. Like, again, a luminous stone, that you could see also at night. You see this today, you see in different scientific videos and so on. You see things that are luminous, that even by night, because it has an element of something that's glowing within it, there's properties that are glowing. But it's not a light that shines. So we have now really three levels here so far. We have the sun, which we're going to talk about. The sun is not just, it's not just luminous and glowing, it gives off light, literally like a massive, like a flashlight. I mean, a flashlight is not even a comparison. A candle is similar. They give off light. So they're not just luminous, they give off light. Then you have a stone that's luminous, but it doesn't give off light. It shines in its own place. And then you have the Ohr Hariyah, which can see, but it doesn't give off any light at all. It's not even luminous. In other words, if you look at somebody in the dark room, you're not going to see their eyes are glowing. Not talking about the eyes of a cat now. We're talking about the human eyes. So bottom line is, as we'll soon discuss what the significance of all of this is, and I'll explain it, but I just wanted to read inside because this is going to be critical, as I said, to understanding Torah Ohr, in contrast to Ner Mitzvah, Ner Nashem Nishmas Adam, and ultimately how we achieve that through our Avodah. So we'll get to that. So he says like this. Okay. Mashenkin Ohr HaShemesh. Ohr HaShemesh, on the other hand, Hu Ohr HaMeir. It's a shining light. The Levada Be'ir Shabai. Besides the fact that it's a luminous body called the sun, and nothing, the darkness does not conceal it. It also illuminates darkness, which is more than just being a luminous or glowing entity. Being that it's a moyer be'etzem, it was created to be fundamentally a source of light, what he called before Ohr Atzmi. And the light and reflection that extends from it, from the sun, who Ohr Atzmi, is an Ohr Atzmi, meaning it is a fundamental level of Ohr. It's not Ohr coming from elsewhere. It itself, an Ohr Atzmi, Al-Kain Hu Meir. That's why it radiates and illuminates. So now we're going to go back to contrasting that with Ohr Hariyah, and I will explain what the context of all of this is to what we're going to be learning and the bigger picture. But let me just first go back to the contrast. Ohr Hariyah, when it comes to the eyesight, the light of the eye, it's not a light that illuminates darkness. And the proof of that is, in a dark space, the eyes will not see. And it's also not the second level, like a luminous stone. It's not a glowing entity either. Because you don't see it in the night. Not like a stone that glows. So clearly the darkness conceals it, has the power to conceal the ability for the eye not just to see, but also for the eye to shine in any way. So then why is it called Ohr Hariyah? Why is it called, what are you seeing? It's in a place where there's light. Then the eye sees. Dafka the eye, not other parts of the body. And you need an eye to be able to see. So it's not like the eye is some incidental thing. But the eye on its own, in all natural circumstances, the eye will not see in the dark. Okay. So before we continue summing up what he says, I'll give a summary of where this is headed. This is very, very fascinating. And also, because we need to understand Why does the Rebbe Rashab feel that he has to do 110 pages to explain a concept that seemingly we learn in Torah Ohr and the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer about Ner Torah Ohr and Ner Mitzvah, that the neshama through mitzvahs and Torah illuminates this world. So this long explanation of these 110 pages can be summed up as follows. Let's go back to the concept of interface. An interface here, we're dealing with the two entities that we want to interface is God in his full glory. So we're talking about Ohr Ein Sof, but not just Ohr Ein Sof, the Ohr Atzmi, all the way to Atzmus itself, that we want to experience that in a world that is antithetical, literally the other end of the spectrum. Tachtenim. In the words of the Alter Rebbe in Tanya, Tachten shein tacht lamata mimen. So we're talking about having the highest levels of revelation and beyond even revelation. Experiencing in a place that is the lowest of all lowest in context of revelation. Like he says, what does Tachten mean? Tachten doesn't mean just physical, the lowest level. It means the lowest level in revelation, that there's no gili. So higher worlds is more gili alakus. In a Tachten shein tacht lamata menu, everything is completely concealed. So you now need to interface literally between two opposites, which is why we need a whole Seder Ishtalshlus. As we've discussed many times, since God does not want this to be a miracle, and due to his power of Kol Yochel, obviously the Eibishter could make anything. For him, it's not a paradox. We learned at length in the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer that for God there's no darkness altogether. So he's here just as he is Atuhu Mishanivreelim, Kedim Shanivreelim, Atu Kedim Shanivreelim, Atuhu Lachish Shanivreelim. It's the same Ata, the same God. The existence and the tzimtzum does not conceal at all. It's like the teacher, even if he's concealing his mind, ideas from the student, it's not concealed from his perspective. And with Hashem and God, it's even more so. But that's not the kavanah. That God can see through it all, or then what's the point? That's the case. The chiddush is like we learned in Seder Ishtalshlus, in a place where there is magbi and mashpili, and there's higher levels and lower levels, to the point to the lowest level, that even in the lowest of worlds, where it's a cheshach kafla mechupel, a quadruple darkness, tacht neshen tacht lamatamen, a malkum of klippus and sitra achre. So it's not just dark. You have forces that actually oppose and are hostile to godliness, to the point that people say, Aniva Avsied, me and nothing else. There is no God. I am God, or I am the center of all of existence. And we don't need proof of that. This is what much of the world functions on that level. That in that place, that's the chiddush. That world, through its perception and its work, should come to realize the truth of all truths, that the true reality is godliness, even in this dark world. So, of course, as I said, that's a very tall order. How do you interface such two opposite realities? So God gave us a series of a whole Seder Ishtalshlus, a whole cosmic order. And says, like we learned yesterday, you climb step by step. You can't do this overnight. First, you begin by first understanding and coming to a perception there's more to life than you. It's not all about you. And then we learned about it earlier in the third volume in Ayin Beis, Mutfa, Murgesh, Muskel. First, it's instinctive, habitual, like a child. Then the emotions begin to develop and your mind begins to develop and you come to perceive that there's more than not just not you, there's higher levels. To the point you come to even understanding that existence is actually a creation and the real reality is godliness. But this is a long process and a slow process of step by step by step. And we can't jump and leap. Like we learned yesterday, when it comes to Mata Lamaila, there's no leaping. Because you have to integrate, it has to be on your level. You have to be able to climb. If someone lifts you up, that's Mamaila Lamata. By Matan Teda, there was Maila, Hashem lifted us. So a parent can lift a child up. But for the child to grow, the child has to learn to walk and climb and ultimately lift itself up all the way to the highest levels. Like we learned in this week's parsha, Ba'aloischa, Shalheves Ele Me'elel. You want the flame to rise on its own. So yes, you first ignited the Kohen Gadol lights the flame, but the flame has to rise on its own. And that's a critical piece in the Dira B'Tachtenim, that the Tachtenim, through their effort and their initiative, and on their terms, should come to realize, to come to perceive and experience godliness. So it's a process that step by step by step, and every day we say, B'chol avavta Hashem Elokecha, B'chol avavcha, B'chol nafshecha, B'chol meidecha, preceded by Shema Yisrael. It's a Vedic daily. And it's not just of one person. It's an Aveda that's going on now for thousands of years, accumulative and growing. And ultimately, yes, Mashiach coming will be the eruption of all that power and energy that has been generated. And the world will be itself a Dira B'Tachtein. So in this process of interface, we've been learning throughout the whole Hemshech Ayin Beis so many levels. Oiris and Kalim, the Tzimtzum, the Parsa, Atzilus, Chachma, Keser, Bria, every level in Ishtalshlus can be called an interface. Just as it is, let's say, in engineering. In engineering, it's not just one interface, it's a series of many interfaces. When you press your smartphone, it triggers a whole series of interfaces to get the results you want. So in Seder Shtas, it's a whole process. So, but nevertheless, we try to quantify, we try to somewhat summarize it. We talk about 4 worlds, 4 levels. Atzilus, Bria, Yetzirah, Asiya. But we know that in the 4, there's more. In Atzilus, there's Bria and Yetzirah and Asiya. And then there's the 10 spheres, and each sphere encompasses all the spheres. So you see, there's a very complex system, and yet we look to try to create general categories to make it a little more palatable, and we could be able to relate to it. So what we're going to be learning now is that in the process of a dark world, where an neshama comes down into a world that conceals godliness, it's not just you do one thing and suddenly you see God, you see godliness. It's a process that has to go through step by step by step. So just as it is with what I just spoke about, the growth from a child into an adult, and we continue to grow, so we have several levels of how Ohr manifests. There's the Ohr HaMashpia. That would be like the sun. The sun is a luminary that illuminates. It shines, like the teacher. In a way, the Shemesh can be called Mamayel Lamata, because we don't do anything for the sun to shine and illuminate when the sun rises every morning. The sun was blessed by Hashem. It says by Yivra, he created the Me'eres Agdelim, L'hoyer al-Oretz. Moira Gadol, the Shemesh, the sun, to radiate. He doesn't say it explicitly here that it's Mamay Lamata, but it's pretty clear that that's how it functions. So that's a Moira Mashpia. That's like the teacher giving off light. But in the Ohr Makabel, meaning how we receive light, there's also levels. And it's not either your complete Makabel. In the Makabel itself, you can have, for example, like we spoke about, a luminous stone. A stone has a glow to it. It's just not radiating and shining, but it has some glow. The moon also shines, not with its own light. It's a reflection of the sun. But there's a light coming off from the moon. And then there's Ohr HaRiyah. Riyah is the real operative concept he wants to explain here. Riyah is the real ultimate paradox, because on one hand, it doesn't shine at all. Like you said, you can't see in the dark. On the other hand, the eye itself sees. The moon and the stone, as we shall learn, are not an Ohr that comes from them. The moon reflects light and therefore gives off light, like a mirror. But a mirror doesn't have any light power in it. The eye does. When you illuminate a room with outside light, the eye itself sees. It's not dependent on reflecting something else. The eye will see the objects, but it needs an outside light to be able to see. So the eye is interesting on one hand, as we'll learn inside more details about it. On one hand, it's the eye itself that sees. In many ways, it's probably it doesn't say it's deeper than the sun, but it probably is, because we're going to learn that the Etzem Ariyah ultimately doesn't even need outside light, but that we'll leave for later. On the other hand, it doesn't have any light of its own. So what are these points? That essentially you could say these gradations, these different levels that God created in existence, he created them for a reason. Because he wanted to give us, he wanted to give us in our own reality, real examples, real empirical examples of different levels of how we assimilate light in our lives. So it's not just a sun that's shining the earth, but also part of existence itself can absorb light, like it is with the luminous stone or the moon, and we'll learn the difference about them as well. Or even that it doesn't absorb light, but it itself sees. However, it needs an outside light to allow it to see. So this is helping us understand in the interface that you don't just leap. Like, so let's translate it more in terms of in practical terms. A student is a beginner. Took a 5-year-old, he's starting to learn Chumash, or even earlier, starting to learn Aleph Beis, Teira Tziva Lonu Moshe, very basic things. So we know in the Aleph of Anochi is included the whole word Anochi, the whole Anochi Hashem Elokecha, the first of the 10 commandments. All the 10 commandments are included in the Anochi. The whole Teira is included in the 10 commandments. But what does the child see when they learn an Aleph? And I say see, I'm using that word very intentionally. What do they perceive? An Aleph. They see an Aleph on the page, and that's that. You can tell the child, this Aleph, as you'll unpack it and as you grow and your mind will expand, you'll begin to learn that this Aleph includes in it much more than just a simple letter. It means Alufei Shalelam, Hashem. Echad refers to the unity of God. And the Aleph, as you develop it, will and unpack it, you'll see and flesh it out, that it develops into a whole Torah. So when you talk about a beginner student, what are they seeing or perceiving? Very little, but something they have. They have a little understanding of something, letters. Once you learn letters, then you can learn to put together letters into words. Words become sentences. Sentences become paragraphs. Paragraph becomes chapters, and chapters become volumes. And basically, all of knowledge begins with Aleph Beis, or the alphabet, ABC. But from the child, the student's perspective, they only see very little glimpse, a little glimmer, one little letter. But all of intelligence is going to emerge from that. So you see here, right here, the process, the step-by-step process, that we begin our lives in darkness, in this context, in ignorance, because even though we learned the entire Torah in our mother's womb, but we're made to forget consciously, and the rest is a process, mamata lamaila, step by step. So to make it a little more, or make it a lot more, I would say, understandable and palatable, we have these different levels of light that show us how a dark state can begin to experience light, step by step by step, to the point, like that mimer begins, our eyes will shine like the sun and the moon. But that's already a very high level. Before we get there, we start with Ohr HaMakabel, which is Mamata Lamail. And the Ohr HaMakabel itself, as we shall learn now, has 3 levels. The Ohr HaLevana, the Ohr HaBohir of a stone that is a luminous, and the Ohr HaRiyah, which is the eye. Now, the real focus here is the eye. The Rebbe Rashab began this whole piece that we want to explain Ohr HaRiyah. And from this, we'll come back to understanding Ner Mitzvah and Torah Ohr. Again, the Rebbe Rashab never gets back to this connection between Torah Ohr and Ohr HaRiyah. But we could definitely extrapolate from what he does say, and from what we learned in the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer and the Alter Rebbe's Maimer, and from the Neinu Me'iris that now we're introducing another Maimer. And when you combine them together, you could piece together the plot and the narrative here. So essentially what we're going to be learning now in the next, I would say 110 pages, literally, is these 3 levels. Well, a big part of it is the 3 levels of Ohr HaMakabel. Then we'll go back to Ohr HaRiyah. And then from there, he's going to go back to Ner Mitzvah Torah Ohr. But when you understand the flow, you can see where this is headed. And there's no question that the Rebbe Rashab would have tied these knots together at some point, but we were not zeicha. We didn't merit to see the end of Hemshech Ayin Beis. But we can definitely derive from everything I just said what would most likely have been the continuation of the story. So essentially what we're talking here is about Mamat Lamayla, Mamayla Lamata, Makabel and Mashpia, with Teira Eir being Mashpia, but and like Tefillah, or the Aveda Mamat Lamayla of a Neshama climbing from the bottom up, like V'yadaita Hayim. That's Mamat Lamayla, not Atar Eis Ladas, as we learned yesterday, and the process of how we actually climb. So even though we're now in the section called Mamayla Lamata with Teira, but to understand Teira, he's contrasting it now with the Eira Makabel of these three levels of Eira Makabel. Now, one more point, which I want to elaborate upon a bit, and then my plan is to start going through the next pages, and as I said, select certain sections just to show the flow as we continue our review of the end of Hemshech Ayin Beis, now illuminated, no pun intended, in context of what we've learned in the other Maimarim. So the next point is that in Teira itself, even though Teira in general is Mamayla Lamata Teira Eir, but we're going to learn that in Teira itself, you also have these three levels. Because firstly, there's Teira Shebiksav and Teira Shebal Peh, as we learned in the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer, that Teira Shebal Peh in Teira is Mamata Lamayla, because Teira Shebiksav was given at Har Sinai. Teira Shebal Peh was also Teira B'Pirusha, and Hashem gave it to us. But a lot of it is developed through our work and through our learning, as we shall learn the Talmud. And we're actually going to learn there's three levels in Teira. You remember Mikra, Mishnah, Talmud. So Mikra is the most Mamayla Lamata. It's Mamish Teira Shebiksav. Mishnah is a combination of Mamayla. It's mostly Mamayla Lamata, but it's already coming down into the Kalim of the Talmud. And then there's going to be Talmud, which comes after Mechshakim Hashivani, through the darkness that we come to understand what Teira says. Teira Shebal Peh, the Gemara coming to explain and derive from the Mishnah all the different halachas. We'll learn that inside more detail. So what do you see from this? The point I made earlier, that even though in general Teira is Mamay Lamat, in Teira itself we have all these levels. And we learned it explicitly in the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer. He spoke about Aveda of mitzvahs and Aveda of Seif Maisa, which is the action that we do in this world. But he also said that Teira Shebal Peh, compared to Teira Shebiksav, is also a form of Mamata Lamayla, as we learned. So in Teira itself, we also have all these levels, which just makes even richer what I said. But this only enriches the concept of interface. So wherever you go, you're going to see levels upon levels that allow for the integration. Because if Teira was completely Mamayla Lamata only, and Hashem said to Moshe, as Moshe actually requested, let me tell you the laws, you don't have to do anything. You don't have to learn it. You don't have to develop it. You don't have to argue about it. You don't have to be mefalpul and go to Adin Teira. Everything is given to you on a platter from above. Then you'd have, again, Hamshacha Mamayla, but it would not be part of our Aveda. It wouldn't be integrated within us. Hashem gave us a gift and said, I'm partnering with you. I will give you the written Teira. I will give you the methodologies, the Yud Gimel Midrash Teira Nidreshes Bam, the 13 methodologies of how to derive and how to Kal V'chemer and Gzeira Shava and Binyanav and so on. I'll give you the methodologies, but I need you. You will be studying and exerting yourself to try to understand the intention of a particular verse. And there'll be disagreements, Shammai and Hillel and Rav and Shmuel and the Chachamim and the Tanakama, etc. It could have been much simpler had God just given us the Teira on a platter. But he wants a Mamata Lamayla, not just a Mamay Lamata, Dira B'Tachtenim. To the point that even Hashem defers to Leiteira B'Lei B'Shamayim. He defers to Rabbi Bar Nachmani, like the famous Gemara, where there's a disagreement between Mesivta the Kuchabrichu and Mesivta the Rakia. They were learning something in the laws of Negoyim, of leprosy. And there was a disagreement. The Mesivta the Kuchabrichu, which is God's academy, so to speak, had one opinion. Mesivta the Rakia, which was an academy in heaven of the angels, had a different opinion. And they said, how will be Machriya? How will we determine? We'll go down below, because Teira Lei B'Shamayim. And they went to Rabbi Bar Nachmani, and he paskined. And the Eber says, and he paskined not like Mesivta the Kuchabrichu. You would think he would rule the way God's opinion. And God says, Natschuni chayech. God smiles and says, Natschuni bani natschuni. You have prevailed, my son, you have prevailed. What does that mean? Because Hashem gave the Torah to us, and we have the ability to be Mekadosh, the Levana, and establish when is the new moon, and therefore establish when is Yom Tov. So there are things given from above, like Mekadsha B'Kaima Shabbos. Shabbos is not determined by us. It's the seventh day of the week. 7 cycles of day and night is Shabbos. But there are things that are dependent on us, and not only that, as we're going to learn, there are things that we actually have the power to mishana and be machadish in Torah, to be mashpia in Torah. So Torah is not just a mashpia, it could also be a makabel from the one who's learning Torah. All to emphasize that as much as it's mamay lamata, there's a need to integrate with a mamata lamayla within the mamay lamata. So what we're learning now is not just 2 exclusive worlds. Either it's hamshacha from above, or it's initiated from below, but that they actually work hand in hand and complement each other, which of course is critical in the ultimate interface, because you want the benefit of both. You don't just want what we initiate, we want revelation from above on God's terms, like we spoke about God's perspective. We want to have our perspective, and then we want them to join together, like we learned the yichud of both yichudim, as we shall discuss more in detail as we get there. So this is somewhat of an introduction to the next, I would say, 110 pages, if I could sum it up in brief. But what we're going to do is, as I said, we're not going to learn all the 110 pages. I'm going to go through it piece by piece, try to select key lines, but show the flow, because then we'll be able to really appreciate where Ayin Beis is headed, and then see how it gets back to Teira Er, and Ner Mitzvah, and Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam. And again, so essentially what I'm saying is, combined by what the Rebbe Rashab is saying, and some of the hints he gave us earlier by things he said he would explain later, even if he didn't explain it, and questions he asked, combined with the Alter Rebbe and the Mittler Rebbe's Ma'ir Mika Hashem Elokeinu, combined with the Maimer Ve'inenu Me'ires, and of course combined with everything we learned earlier in Ayin Beis, like we reviewed yesterday and other sections, all together, when you bring it together, comes into an exquisite and elaborate and a magnificent picture of the whole interface of divine and existence and all the tools necessary to achieve that. So that's in sum the picture of what we're going to be learning. I will stop here if anybody wants to clarify anything from what I've just said. But as I said, it will all now be more understood as we see the details develop here.
I have a question. First of all, thank you. That was a great summary of what we learned before, and connecting it to the more recent Maimonides we learned. The idea of the eyes seeing in the darkness, which is the ultimate vision, if you will, the ultimate illumination, where the eyes can see in the darkness without any assistance, seems to correspond, by the framework you just set up and what we've been learning, seems to correspond with the idea of the human intellect essentially channeling or developing, seeing godliness instead of what it perceives from the light, the assisted light. It itself begins to, the transformation, that is to say, that we're talking about, like the shemen is actually fueling the light and transform, and the shemen is transforming the human intellect into a vessel that conducts godliness, if you will, instead of as opposed to conducting its own affairs, which is the sheker, which is the falseness and the darkness. So I guess, is that correct? Are we saying that the ultimate, and I guess we say it's not until last Lavo, when Mashiach comes, that we'll see the full manifestation of this, but ultimately, is it fair to say that this idea of the eyes actually having the capacity to see in the darkness corresponds with the transformation of the human intellect from something that is just seeing everything on its own terms, rather seeing reality as it truly is, meaning through in the guise of
The answer is yes. I thought I said it explicitly yesterday and also in previous classes.
Okay. Well,
So
maybe
the
it just
answer is
clicked
yes.
in my 6:30 a.m. California brain.
No, it's fine. I'm saying the answer is yes.
Okay. Got it. Thank you.
No, I'm not. It's not a critique why you didn't pick it up. I'm just trying to point out that it's something that's central to the whole theme here, is ultimately reaching that level. And we'll see inside here. He's going to describe that a little later in this Hemshech in Ayin Beis. And the Mittler Rebbe talks about it a bit as well. And again, the Maimer Ve'einenu Me'ires is a critical Maimer here as well in this context, because there he speaks about it very explicitly. So I'll get there when we get there. Right now, we're going to start now really discussing the 3 levels of Ohr Makabel. But before he goes there, before I continue, any other questions?
But did we learn? I don't think we learned that mimer, did we? Forgive me if we did, and I don't remember.
No, I referred to it and I cited parts of it when we learned this. I don't think I learned it inside. Maybe I did. I don't remember now.
I don't think so. Where can we find? Where can I find
definitely,
it?
I think we posted it. I think I posted it.
What is the exact citation?
Ve'einenu me'ires. It's a mimer called Ve'einenu me'ires.
But what Rebbe? Which year? The Alter Rebbe?
It's not printed. I said it's not printed. It's a mimer from the Mittler Rebbe based on the Alter Rebbe's mimer that was never printed. I have a copy of it, but it was not. It was prepared for print, but they never actually printed it.
Can you share that with us, please?
I did.
I did. You did?
Not now. I shared it then.
Okay, I'll have to go back and look. If I can find it, I will repost it for everybody.
Yeah, it's right here. I see. Yeah. Actually, 1 second. Yeah, I see it was posted. I see January 23rd, 2023. Talking about a while ago, almost 2 years ago.
Thank you. Wonderful. If you're there, if your real mom is right there on your screen, if you could just forward it back to the Ayin Beis group, that would be huge.
It's actually a different. There's 2 Maimorim here. I'm trying to look at what I posted.
Because learning that now, I don't remember if I looked at it then, but reading it now with the background of what we learned in the Mi Kashem Elokeinu Maimerim would probably be even more meaningful, I'm guessing.
Yeah, for sure. I remember I posted it for sure. I'm not remembering where. Okay. But that's not the Mittler Rebbe. That's a different mimer that you found, but it's not the mimer I'm referring to. But it's still connected. Still connected. Let me see here. Yeah. I'll find it.
Okay, thank you.
Does anybody learn these Maimorim?
I mean, I do. When you post it, I probably looked at the one you just said. I guess I must have found it myself, you said.
No, there was some
people...
place where it was talked about, yeah. Oh, I could post the actual mimer. I just found it as well.
That was previously posted?
It was posted somewhere. I don't remember now where, to be honest.
But if you found it, if you could just share it, that would be huge.
Besides you, does anyone look at these mimer?
I hope so.
Okay.
I bet you Rabbi Teichel does. Is he with us today? No, he's not with us today.
Okay. Anyway, I see. Okay. So any other questions before I can sum up here? Continue. Anybody wants to ask anything else? No? Okay.
I just want to comment that it is such an amazing dynamic. It's all dynamic. And I think
Yeah.
that's what they meant when they said that this is life. Like life is dynamic. The Torah and all of these, everything that we're learning is dynamic. It's always growing, like, I don't know. It's probably
That's correct. That is correct. Okay.
So this last thing you posted is Mamash, the mimer he's referring to in the Ayin Beis?
Yeah.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. Wonderful. Thank you.
Which is based, I believe, on the Alter Rebbe's mimer that I also just posted.
Excellent. Thank you.
Okay. So now, since we have a few more minutes, let me just say this. So the next section, the Mittler Rebbe Rashab says like this, I'm reading closer to the bottom of 1352. So after my introduction, this will be very well understood. So you see here, right here, he's establishing that in Ohr itself, there's masculine and feminine. Because based on everything we learned, you can say Ohr is hashpah. It's only masculine energy, meaning transmitted energy. It doesn't have the element of the absorbing and integration, which is related to the feminine. Beginnes tchar hu mashpia, Ohr mitzad atzmei. Tchar in Ohr is the level of mashpia that it transmits Ohr on its own. Sheyesh b'keich atzmei l'hoyer Ohr v'ziv boher, that has in its own power to radiate or illuminate light, a shining light. V'zeu k'ma Ohr hashemesh v'Ohr haner. That's like the light of the sun and the light of a candle. Shashemesh nikra moir. The shemesh is called a luminary. It's a source of light. Shu be'etzem b'chinas Ohr. The shemesh is created to be a source of light. It's be'etzem Ohr, light, umafil kol b'chinas Ohr v'ziv. Mafil means it initiates, or mafil effectuates all levels of Ohr v'ziv. Everything, all light that we know, we're talking about daylight, the light that we experience on earth comes from the sun. Another example for this would be Eish, Bechena Eish, fire. Nikra moir. Now you could say, isn't fire a candle? Not necessarily. Candle could be a small flame. Eish could also include a torch. But regardless, he says, Eish nikra moir. In the parentheses, he qualifies about Eish Yisedi. I don't want to go into that, so I'm going to skip that for now. Al Kain Meir Ohr Gam B'Cheshech. That's why this level of tchar, of the so-called masculine mashpia ad Ohr, that's why it radiates and illuminates light, also in a dark place. That's tchar. What about nukva? The feminine dimension of light. So it doesn't have its own power to give off light. But rather, when it receives and absorbs within itself a reflection of light, then it also radiates. Now keep in mind, he's not necessarily talking about a man and a woman here. He's talking about the archetypes of masculine hashpah and feminine receptivity. So it's more of an archetypal concept here. Because we know a woman could also teach and could also be mashpia, because they overlap as well. But he's talking here the concept of more of the concept of mashpia and makabel. So it also gives off light, but it's a light that comes as it's reflecting something that is being transmitted within it. What's an example for this? He gave the example for mashpia, the sun, a candle, and a flame. What's the example for the second type of light? He says, like when we see a teacher, a mashpia, transmitting intelligence to a recipient, even before he begins to teach, the makabel is not getting his brain and mind from the teacher. He's getting ideas, but he has seichel beforehand. However, that seichel is not yet illuminating or shining until the teacher gives him material to think about. This doesn't mean he doesn't have other ideas. We're talking about this idea that's being transmitted. So it's not that the teacher is giving him the intellect itself. He's giving him the idea. So now his mind that he has already is now stimulated to think about. So teachers introducing, let's say, a new concept, a concept of what we're learning now about makabel, mashpia. So when you're listening to it, this may be the first time you hear it. So it's not that your mind is active, but now your mind has been so-called stimulated with this idea that the teacher has presented to you. That's what makabel is. So it's not the makabel, the seichel. It's it's not makabel, let's call it the instrument of the cognitive instrument of a mind that's able to understand things. It's makabel, the idea, the light coming from the teacher that in turn is getting the makabel now to think about it and understand it and comprehend on his level. The idea limud ben mashpia, and by learning the idea from the mashpia, yaskil haskolas ba'atzme, then he will be able to conceive of ideas on his own. He can even come up with ideas that the teacher hasn't even shared with him, because he has seichel. We're not talking about, he's not just a funnel that's just passing through. The idea of the teacher is like a seed that's now planted in the brain and the mind of the student. The gam yashpia lazulas. And the makabel could also be mashpia to another. It's not just he's receiving, he could also teach it to another person. Even when he's not in the presence and the seichel and mashpia is not radiating anymore. So in other words, even if he leaves his teacher's presence, once the idea has been planted within him, he can now conceive new ideas, can think about it, can teach it, and so on. But and on the contrary, kol mashi yisrachik hatalmid min harav, the more distance that the student has from the teacher, yachol yesel lashpia, that enables him more to be mashpia, because as long as he's in the presence of his teacher, besides the fact that he may just be humble and not want to say anything, but still the light of his teacher really will be dominant. When does he become a real mashpia, the makabel? When he's on his own. He builds his own so-called community or students and stuff like that. So you see here two levels of Ohr. They're both Ohr. We don't call the makabel not Ohr. It's just a different way it functions. The Ohr is being received that triggers the Ohr makabel, whereas the first one is an initial mashpia. Now, of course, you could say, isn't every mashpia makabel? Every teacher is a student of his teacher. That's true. But here he's focusing more on just that here is a mashpia and here's a makabel. The sun, you could also argue, God gave it that light. It's not, the sun did not create itself. It did not create itself as being a luminary. God created it in a way that it can give off light. But he created the moon in a way that it doesn't give off light until it receives from the sun. So bottom line, everything is created by God. That's not the question here. Everything, the real mashpia is only Hashem, obviously. But in existence itself, you have a er mashpia and a er makabel, the dchar, er nukva, the masculine and the feminine. So the feminine is not less of a oir; it's just a different way it functions, a different way that it gives off light. And actually, in many ways, it's even deeper, as we learned in Mittler Rebbe's Maimer, and we'll learn here as well, because it's the integration within the recipient, which is even stronger than just giving off light. It's in order to internalize it, which we'll discuss more later. I'm going to stop here. You see here how this is so critical in the whole interface discussion, because you see now how Ohr has many dimensions to it. All this is going to help us understand Ner Mitzvah, Teira Ohr, and Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam. What I just wanted to say one more thing before I stop, and that is now I'm also really understanding why he uses Ohr HaNer, because a Ner is not quite like Shemesh, but it still has an element of Mashpia. Remember, we learned about mitzvah is a combination of Mamayla Lamata, Mamata Lamayla. Teira is primarily Mamayla Lamata. So Ohr, real Ohr, like real Shemesh, that's Mamish Teira. The mitzvahs could be more like the moon, because it has a combination of its own, because it's Ratzon Elyon, but it doesn't really illuminate until it receives from the Teira. So it has an element of Makabel as well. And so Mashpia and a Makabel may be part of this whole discussion. Again, the Rebbe Rashab rather does not spell that out here or later, but it may be what I'm saying now, I will use later when we get back to Teira Ohr and Ner Mitzvah. It may be very helpful in the whole context of interface. Okay. So we shall stop here, bottom of 1352. And I feel comfortable saying I like where this is going. I think it's going to be very, very organized and structured. And I think we'll all come away with a much more fundamental understanding of Ayin Beis, and especially doing maybe the biggest service of all, trying to understand how Ayin Beis would have developed had the Rebbe Rashab continue writing it. Okay, we'll stop here. Anybody want to ask anything? Any comments?
It's interesting that it didn't. He uses the mashpia mekabel but does not bring the moon concept of the moon that you just mentioned.
He's going to bring it, because he's going to bring it soon.
Got it. Okay.
If you see, look at the bottom of the page. Because the moon is a whole long discussion in this context here. Yeah. Okay. Stop here.